From an unsuspecting roommate hiding bodies in the backyard to a serial killer known for ripping the throats of his victims. 23 documentaries, 23 disturbing videos, 7 levels. Let's start at the tip of the iceberg. Disclaimer. Level 1. Lover, Stalker, Killer, 2024. A regular guy swipes right on a dating app, lands a casual meetup, and suddenly his reality is upended by events no one could predict. Lover, Stalker, Killer of 2024 pulls viewers straight into the twisted chaos that followed Dave Krupa, a Nebraska auto mechanic, after a seemingly innocent night online. The initial setup is basic. Two people connect, Krupa and Liz Gollier. A brief relationship follows, then it ends. At least, Krupa thinks it's over. What unravels from there feels like a warning for anyone who thinks they know who they're talking to on the internet. Soon after his breakup with Liz, Krupa meets Carrie Farver, and things get complicated fast. When Liz unexpectedly shows up at his place while Carl is there, tension sizzles for just a moment.
I explained to Carrie what's going on. To have this conversation, it was a little fucking awkward.
The next day, Carrie vanishes without a trace, yet Krupa's phone won't stop buzzing. Messages and taunts, at first seemingly from Carrie, arrive at all hours and get more frequent as weeks go by. There's no escape: email, social media, text. Suddenly, two women he barely knew are haunting his every waking moment.
It turns out that Liz is being harassed by Carrie in the same ways as I was, by text and email.
What makes the documentary so jarring is the mixture of sit-down interviews and reenactments that occasionally feature Krupa himself. The viewer isn't just told what happened, as they're given the feeling of never quite knowing what's around the corner, much like Krupa experienced. Law enforcement sounds confused before eventually becoming suspicious, and friends and family offer their insight. As months drag on, it's all threats, break-ins, and mysterious fires. Even a family pet is lost to a blaze. The true horror is revealed when investigators realize the person orchestrating this campaign isn't invisible after all. Digital forensics exposes an elaborate case of stolen identity. The messages supposedly from Carrie are actually coming from Liz, who spends up to 50 hours per week faking digital footprints, building an alternate online reality in order to hide what she's really done. Through relentless impersonation of Carrie, whose body was never found, Liz crafts a story so convincing it fools police for years.
It didn't take me long checking the boxes in my head to come to the conclusion that Carrie was probably dead. And that's tough to swallow. That's beyond tough.
The evidence eventually points to a conclusion, and Liz was sentenced to jail, all while Krupa is just numb. What once was a digital romance opened the door to all the online and physical torment he'd experienced. The Hatchet-Wielding Hitchhiker, 2023. Yesterday's hero, now an alleged killer? The Netflix documentary The Hatchet-Wielding Hitchhiker explores the strange rise and catastrophic downfall of Caleb Kai McGilvery, a Canadian drifter propelled into online stardom overnight. Back in 2013, footage of Kai recounting an incident in which he used a hatchet to stop a driver's rampage on a woman surfaced online.
He runs up and he grabs one of them, man. Like a guy that big can snap a woman's neck like a pencil stick. So I ran up behind him with a hatchet, smash, smash, smash.
It transformed him from a homeless traveler into a viral folk hero, grabbing attention from global media, celebrities, and talk shows in rapid succession. But the story splinters into much darker territory just a few months later. After being welcomed into the home of 73-year-old New Jersey attorney Joseph Galfi, Kai says the night took a turn. According to him, Galfi gave him a place to stay, and the next morning, Kai says he woke up groggy, noticing a metallic taste in his mouth. The implication, directly stated in Kai's own Facebook post, is that he believed he'd been unknowingly dosed with something. With confusion and panic mounting, he described finding Galfi attempting to remove his pants while he was barely lucid. Kai's claim was that he acted instinctively, lashing out, which led to Galfi's death. The event thrust Kai into the spotlight once more, this time tagged as a suspect in a grisly beatdown. Law enforcement quickly built a case that called Kai's story into question. Prosecutors highlighted the sheer brutality of Galfi's injuries. Over 50 wounds, severe fractures to the skull, broken ribs, and evidence of repeated trauma across the face, chest, and arms.
His ear was almost off, and it had a scuff mark on the ear, like that blood stain in the hallway, where you could see some type of material in the blood stain, and it sort of looked like that on his ear.
The coroner's report made the self-defense claim seem less plausible, especially considering Galfi's health issues, advanced age, and physical state at the time of the incident. During the trial, the jury learned that Kai actually fled the scene and cut his hair to alter his appearance. He traveled across state lines before ultimately being recognized and taken into custody. The court examined surveillance footage, digital evidence, and cell phone records, all of which added to the ambiguity surrounding Kai's account. Prosecutors painted a picture of a crime with intent rather than an act of spontaneous desperation. After weeks of testimony and days of jury deliberation, Kai McGilvery was found guilty of first-degree in 2019 and given a 57-year prison sentence. Level 2. The Confession Tapes, 2017. The Confession Tapes from 2017 goes deep into the world of law enforcement, picking apart famous cases that rest entirely on what people say under pressure rather than physical proof. Viewers see hours-long questioning sessions with people isolated and visibly breaking down, sometimes young people or those without legal help. The series doesn't just imply these tactics happen, it shows footage of real interrogations, and you watch as the accused seem to lose track of what's true. It's not always obvious. Some start out confident and rational, but after relentless questioning and shrewd psychological tricks, their certainty disappears. The most unsettling story is the case of two teenagers, Sebastian Burns and Atif Rafay. After Rafay's family was found bludgeoned to death, both found themselves at the center of a very elaborate plan. The police, lacking solid evidence, turned to a Mr. Big operation.
The Royal Canadian Mounted Police developed an undercover investigative technique called the Mr. Big technique that they deploy or they use normally in cold cases, but they have a suspect. They just don't have enough evidence to lay charge.
Critics say it's a coercive and a controversial technique, banned in most countries except Canada, where it originates. Undercover officers posed as members of a powerful group, luring the teens in by offering protection and promising rewards. So the interrogators posed as dangerous criminals, letting Sebastian and Atif know their fates depended on what they were willing to reveal. For months, these officers built up the illusion with subtle intimidation and carefully calculated threats, making the boys believe this gang could destroy or save them. The teens are confronted not by physical violence or obvious threats, but by the suggestion that their only way out is to go along with the narrative Mr. Big expects. Video captures their faces as they try to keep up with the pressure. They start repeating details suggested by the undercover officers, and soon those words are used against them in court.
They stashed the weapon, the Walkman that Atif claims to have noticed that was missing in between observing his parents, and the VCR that they yanked out of the holder that it was in. They put them in a series of different dumpsters in Seattle.
These tactics aren't old-fashioned. Experts in the series discuss how law enforcement still uses subtle threats, deception, and manipulative questioning, pushing people into saying things that simply aren't true. In the end, both were charged with aggravated first-degree murder and remain imprisoned. Victim Suspect, 2023. Across the United States, police departments have repeatedly charged young women who report violent encounters with making false reports, accusations that number over 200 documented incidents nationwide in less than a decade. Victim Suspect is a Netflix documentary tracing investigative journalist Ray DeLeon's pursuit of a pattern that's hard to believe. DeLeon's investigation unravels how dozens of people, mostly college students, sought help only to be cross-examined until their stories were flipped back onto them. Instead of support or justice, they faced jail time or even public shaming simply for coming forward.
Nikki pled guilty and went to prison. Emma also pled guilty. But when I spoke to them, they both maintained that the assaults did happen.
The documentary doesn't tiptoe around the way officers handle these cases. Hours of audio and video show investigators deploying tactics meant for hardened suspects. Psychological manipulation, accusations, and pressure, all targeted at vulnerable individuals who thought they'd be protected. One especially disturbing sequence features freshman Emma Mannion, who steps into a police interview expecting honesty will clear her name. Detective Jared Ackridge sits across from her, bristling with suspicion. He brings up surveillance videos that supposedly contradict her account, tells her he spent hours reviewing camera footage, and then leans in with, "I do not believe you at all."
The detective told me he didn't hold you down. That's not wrong.
If you continue to lie to me, this is about to go south. I do not believe you. I do not believe you at all.
The moment lands like a gut punch. Mannion doesn't have a lawyer or even an advocate. The detective openly suggests she's one of those people distracting his department from real victims, a phrase gutted of compassion and context. It's not an isolated event. The footage reveals Ackridge pushing Emma to recant, gaslighting her about the story she's tried to explain. The interrogation continues, making Mannion question herself until exhaustion leaves her defenseless. The pattern that emerges feels brutally clear. DeLeon's footage and interviews show this happening repeatedly.
Because you're no longer a sexual victim, you do not have that right to privacy anymore. These young women have no idea. There is an institution of people who allow it to happen.
As the boundaries between justice and intimidation blur, especially for those who might least expect their truth to be doubted. Thankfully here, we wouldn't doubt your story. We'll just keep making videos you like if you hit that subscribe button. Level 3, Worst Roommate Ever, 2022. Some roommates pull neat tricks, others leave you wondering if you ever truly know the person living next door. Worst Roommate Ever from 2022 isn't about someone forgetting to do the dishes. It's about real stories where sharing a space becomes far more dangerous than most can imagine. The tension in every episode comes from how quickly personal boundaries collapse when someone exploits kindness, loneliness, or desperation. The case that lingers longest in the mind is Dorothea Puentes. The docuseries focuses a full episode on her, a woman in her 60s, appearing gentle and grandmotherly, running a boarding house in Sacramento. Her tenants were some of society's most vulnerable, people with disabilities, the elderly, and those on the margins. What made this story so disturbing is the sheer ordinariness of the setting. Tenants trusted her not just with rent, but often with their government checks.
They would pay for their rent. She became the person that could actually sign those checks and place them in the bank, in which she did.
Over time, several of them vanished. When friends raised concerns about a missing tenant, officers started asking questions. A call for a wellness check unraveled a scheme that had gone unnoticed for years.
So often somebody would come by to kind of inspect and take a look and see what was going on. She knew all the magic words to say to these government officials or people working for social services.
Investigators found prescription medications and eventually uncovered a secret hidden beneath the backyard soil. 7 bodies, all former tenants, each one a person who trusted Dorothea for help. The steps are so mundane that it's unnerving to watch survivors, social workers, and police recount the quiet manipulation that led up to this. Puente won trust through routine acts, cooking, running errands, offering a bed, but she preyed on those who had few places else to turn, systematically removing threats to her authority and quietly accumulating their government income.
They had their little social security check, and they had their life. That's all they had. She took their checks away from them, and then she took their lives away from them.
The series doesn't stop with Puente. It features other cases like Jameson Bachman, a master manipulator who forced out renters using legal loopholes and intimidation tactics, or Yusuf Khater, whose fraudulent schemes left roommates desperate and frightened. Across episodes, strangers take advantage of the trust that comes with shared living. In the end, Puente remained in prison in Chowchilla until her death on March 27, 2011, at age 82. This just goes to show that in the hunt for affordable living, the wrong roommate might not be worth the money saved. Till Do Us Part, Soaring vs. Haysom, 2023. A Virginia mansion, an upscale family, and then the kind of sudden violence that sticks with detectives for decades. Till Do Us Part, Soaring vs. Haysom puts viewers straight into one of the most notorious cases of the 1980s, giving close-up access to what authorities found in the Haysom's home that spring night, making anyone watching gasp at the lasting shock from the blood-soaked living room.
The murders took place at least 2 days before the bodies were found on Wednesday.
I went in the house as they were taking the bodies out, saw everything. It was awful.
Details of the crime scene described in the series are almost unimaginably brutal. Derek and Nancy Haysom, both well known in their community, were discovered in pools of blood, their injuries so severe that police initially wondered whether some kind of group or cult could have been involved. Derek had suffered dozens of stab wounds, one so forceful it damaged bone and pierced his heart, and Nancy was found in the kitchen with nearly as many injuries.
The thing that made the biggest impression to me was that how she died.
Both lay nearly decapitated, something most investigators in Bedford County at the time had never seen before. The interior was described in reports as looking like a house, splashes on the walls, blood pooling on the linoleum, and dinner plates still out on the table. Amid the confusion, investigators quickly realized that ordinary explanations didn't fit what they were seeing. What puzzled law enforcement even further was how the couple's daughter, Elizabeth Haysom, and her boyfriend, Yun Suring, became central figures in the investigation. Elizabeth, raised in privilege, fell fast and hard for Jens, a German student at the University of Virginia. When pressed about their whereabouts, both told uneasy, shifting stories that soon fell apart. Not long after, they fled to Europe only to be picked up for check fraud and brought back to face the investigation in Virginia. Letters surfaced in England written by Elizabeth to Jens implicating both, and in court, their claims turned into accusations against each other, each trying to pin the responsibility elsewhere.
One day they said it was Elizabeth.
She said, "I've killed my parents."
The next day they said it was Jens.
He said that he had killed my parents.
One of the most unnerving moments in the series comes from the testimonies and official reports. Elizabeth ultimately pled guilty to enabling the deaths and received 90 years in prison, while Jens, after changing his story several times and recanting his confession, was handed 2 consecutive life sentences. Despite decades passing, each continues to say the other is responsible, and DNA retesting just raised more questions, with several samples not matching either suspect. Murdaugh, A Southern Scandal, 2023. A well-known family name, an isolated low-country estate, and the echo of gunshots that would change everything. Murdaugh, A Southern Scandal drops viewers into a world where influence can conceal ugly secrets, but nothing stays hidden forever. The Netflix docuseries picks up with law enforcement swarming Moselle, the Murdaugh's sprawling South Carolina property, after Alex Murdaugh's wife and son are found shot dead execution-style near the dog kennels.
The boy I dated for 4 years was his mom was as well next to him. It hurt my heart to know that a human being was maliciously.
From that moment, the protectiveness and power of the Murdaugh legacy are exposed for what they are: shields built over decades of dominance in legal and social circles, now riddled with holes. Suspicion quickly descends on Alex himself, a local attorney from a lineage so intertwined with the justice system that some called the family above the law.
It became clear to us that Alex went over to Alameda to establish an alibi. He lied about the length of time he was there to make it seem like he wasn't home at the time of the murder.
His son Paul's friend describes the culture of fear after the tragic boating accident that preceded the shootings, and locals recall the sudden deaths of locals and the Murdaugh's housekeeper, incidents that seem to orbit the family's name. In measured, matter-of-fact interviews, there's a sense that the most jarring aspect isn't only the brutality of the acts, but the relentless way justice was sidestepped for years by wealth, privilege, and intimidation.
It became clear in the course of her testimony that she'd been very scared. She had doubts about what Alec Murdaugh was asking her to say, and that's why they were there.
As the series moves to the courtroom, cameras linger on Alex taking the stand. The evidence, including a video from Paul's phone, destroys his alibi and leaves jurors with no doubt he's no longer untouchable. After less than 3 hours of deliberation, the guilty verdict for double and weapons charges lands in March 2023, and Alex is led from the courthouse in handcuffs. The Menendez Brothers, 2024. 2 young men pace a Beverly Hills mansion late at night. Emergency calls pierce the silence, voices frantic, but what the authorities find is worse than anyone could imagine. The father and mother, both left unrecognizable, the family's living room splattered with blood and doused in devastation. For over 3 decades, the story behind that carnage has riveted, confounded, and horrified the public. In the new 2024 Netflix documentary, The Menendez Brothers, viewers finally hear the voices of Lyle Menendez and Eric Menendez from prison. They recount what led to that unimaginable night, their words colliding with testimony from relatives, lawyers, and investigators actually entangled in the case. The siblings, now middle-aged and still serving life sentences, don't shy away from the claims that dominated their trial. The audience hears, without filter, how Lyle and Eric describe relentless psychological control, threats, and harm from their father. He is a successful public figure who, they claim, hid something monstrous within the walls of their home.
It's more difficult with my father. So to me, as a boy, he was more than just a man. He was like the modern version of an ancient Greek god. He was different than any man I had ever met. And I simply idolized him. I wanted to be like him. But he was rarely a dad.
Over hours of audio, the brothers reveal the suffocating mix of panic, desperation, and numbness that defined their state of mind and, as they see it, led to catastrophe. Investigators, on the other hand, detail a scene so graphic it is seared into memory. Blood and tissue covering nearly every inch, with a level of force described by first responders as explosive decapitation, and facial deformities so extreme that the victims barely looked human. The trauma of the crime scene left even seasoned detectives shaken. One said it was like nothing ever seen before in Beverly Hills or anywhere else. Some, still defending the brothers, others deeply scarred, speak about years of warning signs, denial, and the public's almost voyeuristic obsession with what went on behind those mansion doors. Attorneys argue over the line separating motive from explanation. Were Lyle and Eric emotionally captive for years or motivated by greed?
He killed his parents because he could no longer endure their abuse and had to stop it. He fired every round in his gun at them.
The documentary doesn't let viewers look away, closing in on every contradiction and moment of raw confession. It exposes that beneath the tabloid spectacle, the cost was not only measured in violence, but also in lifelong repercussions for every single person connected to the case. Sins of Our Mother, 2024. A phone call between a mother and her son frames the opening moments of Sins of Our Mother, but the tension is immediate, and you can feel that this is the start of a chaotic unraveling that no one saw coming. Lori Vallow's journey from doting mom to the media-branded doomsday mom draws viewers in, and the series slowly reveals how her beliefs and decisions carved a path of destruction. Through interviews, home videos, and audio clips, the Netflix documentary details Lori's dramatic slide from participating in her faith community to adopting radical end-time predictions, ultimately pulling her world tighter around Chad Daybell, an apocalyptic author whose influence proves pivotal. Vallow's family watched her descend into deep paranoia, pulling inspiration from podcasts and fringe religious texts. It's clear that by 2018, Lori no longer seemed tethered to daily reality. Her surviving son, Colby Ryan, provides a sobering account. By all appearances, they had once been a normal family, but cracks showed as Lori's views warped further, culminating in her belief that her children had become obstacles in a cosmic battle between good and evil.
It was just like the list of our friends and family, and they were listed as light and dark spirits.
We were both like, what does that mean, light and dark spirits?
She thinks I'm a dark spirit, whatever that means.
And I saw my name on there, and I was a 3 dark spirit.
This is totally not okay.
Family members recount the horror of watching Lori enthusiastically embrace the idea that the world would end in July 2020, and with Daybell elevate her own significance to be exalted goddess. The series paints Lori's meetings with Daybell as a turning point. They believed they had known each other in previous lives, held the power to summon disaster, and were destined to lead a select group of survivors when society collapsed. By the time Lori's children, Tylee and JJ, disappeared, the adults around them were tangled in fantasies about zombies and heavenly interventions. Police interviews collected in the documentary expose how their inner circle justified increasingly bizarre behaviors. The depths of Lori's manipulation and denial are brought into focus through Colby's candid conversations.
You know that I'm asking you every day about my siblings, but she reaffirmed it to me almost every day. Yes, they're fine. Everything's gonna be fine. So it started to build up more and more of there's a thread of hope.
Sins of Our Mother captures the expanding web of suspicion as authorities uncover not only the children's disappearances, but a string of suspicious deaths and attempted hits on others connected to Lori and Chad. Throughout, viewers hear from Lori's mother and other relatives who, at first, can't bring themselves to believe what's happened, only to be left with the grim certainty about Lori's actions as more evidence emerges. Level 4. Dark Tourist, 2018. It starts with a rumor. Somewhere in Cambodia, money can buy you permission to fire a rocket launcher at a cow. The myth draws David Ferrier, host of Netflix Dark Tourist, straight into one of the show's most unsettling detours. The reality behind tourist attractions that blend spectacle with shocking disregard for life. Ferrier's journey takes him to a military-run shooting range notorious among travelers for its anything-goes scenarios. Here, visitors are tempted by a menu of weapons, from pistols all the way up to bazookas, with prices given for various targets, including livestock. The surreal part is how normal it all feels on the surface. The staff are courteous, smiling, eager to facilitate the experience, as though renting jet skis rather than organizing an act of destruction.
I could pay to cow if I wanted to.
But no people. Only the cow or chicken.
It's good. I feel it's good you've got a limit. You know, it's like duck, chicken, sheep, cow, but people, no.
For enough cash, often the equivalent of several months' salary in Cambodia, a local farmer supplies the animals and tourists get their event. Ferrier stands before a live cow, machine gun in hand, surrounded by a group of other travelers, many recording or laughing. It's an attraction promoted in travel circles, sold to thrill seekers who want a story that shocks even their friends. The animal's presence is strangely at odds with the spectacle, docile, unaware of the attention or fate being decided in real time. Ferrier's demeanor changes. The camera lingers as he confronts the implications of this supposed fun. He ultimately refuses to pull the trigger, but his experience proves the practice is no hearsay. It's part of the tourist experience and only a payment away. For the crew, there's only a split second of relief when the act is stopped. What stands out is the mood around the event. The tourists' anticipation and laughter clash with the gravity of the scene, exposing a disconnect. Animals' suffering made trivial through commerce. Ferrier notes how easily violence gets wrapped up as a novelty, a bucket list checkmark relayed on social media. The indifference isn't manufactured for TV. Several sources and reviews confirm the reality of these transactions, with animals purchased, prepared, and served up for a brief, brutal performance. The episode never pretends what's being offered is normal. Still, as the camera pans across faces, some excited, some uneasy, it's clear that in some corners of the tourism industry, the grotesque isn't concealed. It's styled as entertainment, ready for the highest bidder. Memories of the Nielsen Tapes, 2021. From the moment the analog tape spins and Dennis Nielsen's voice cracks through, the documentary Memories of the Nielsen Tapes instantly evokes curiosity. It's the chilling sound of someone calmly narrating, not what happens, but how he wants the story to be remembered. There's no frantic confession or dramatic flourish. Instead, what emerges is a controlled self-portrait drawn by a man who maintains composure even while describing the intricate details of luring young men, primarily those pushed to the margins, to his modest flat with offers of warmth and comfort.
Nielsen went round with his vacuum cleaner, swooping up these victims, these vulnerable young men.
Nielsen's narration stands out for its near total emotional detachment. That absence of any remorse or agitation becomes one of the most unsettling aspects, especially as the documentary probes deeper into his mind, often letting his own audio tapes lead the story without interruption from experts or dramatized reenactments.
What is this article? Accuracy. Oh yes, I was definitely convicted. But apart from that, most of the stuff is just pure fiction.
As Nielsen describes his methodology, the audience is forced to wrestle with the matter-of-fact way he recounts what happened behind closed doors. Step by step, he details how trust was gained only to be betrayed. Nielsen goes into how, once inside, his guests faced strangulation or drowning, followed by rituals that blur the line between routine and grotesque fixation. He speaks of bathing corpses, dressing them, and sometimes sitting them in armchairs, treating them as if nothing had changed. The tape doesn't waver, and nor does his tone. It's as if he's reciting instructions for a recipe, each step measured, each pause loaded with the weight of what's missing, a trace of empathy. In one tape, Nielsen refers to keeping bodies under his floorboards and even talking to them, asserting, "I am not a monster, I am a man." Awkward, isn't it? Nearly every word is calculated in a way that leaves listeners questioning where his real identity lies.
It is a great hurt to be considered to be monstrous. I am not a monster. I am a man. Awkward, isn't it?
There's no sensationalism in the documentary, just a silent, continuous escalation of horror. The disturbing clarity with which Nielsen describes his actions and the muted pride with which he discusses how he fooled police for years. Bikram, Yogi, Guru, 2019. In Bikram, Yoga Guru, it's nearly impossible to turn away as the enigmatic Bikram Chowdhury leads massive classes in sweltering rooms. He's dressed in a black Speedo and Rolex, but followers claim he is a guru who can transform lives through precise routines. He moves through crowds of devoted practitioners, captivating celebrities and everyday people alike, all desperate for approval from the man behind a multi-million-dollar empire. The documentary tracks his ascent from Kolkata to the summit of American health culture. Students believe that only his personal certification delivered with the tightly controlled walls of his global Bikram yoga brand can truly unlock yoga's transformative powers.
My impression of him was very godlike. For me, he was a guru. He was a teacher who was going to make me perfect.
Yet, as survivor testimonies come in, there's an undeniable pattern. Women recount being drawn into private training sessions where their boundaries are gradually eroded, beginning with psychological manipulation and escalating to more invasive forms of control. Behind closed doors, Bikram weaponized microaggressions. Insults about bodies, relentless demands for devotion, while dangling the prospect of career advancement or spiritual enlightenment. All while participants were cut off from outside support in grueling 8-week training camps, left exhausted and vulnerable, and told that questioning him meant jeopardizing their future.
Bikram asked me if I would be with him. And he in fact said, if you decide to stay, then I recommend you do what I do.
Legal records and news coverage weave through the film, exposing the machinery that enabled Bikram to operate unchecked for decades. He prevailed in courtrooms, hired aggressive attorneys, delayed proceedings, and moved his base overseas, and continued teaching even as accusations mounted. His network of loyalists, some too invested to face betrayal, others paralyzed by fear of professional ruin, created an insulating layer of denial and victim blaming.
Bikram Chowdhury never paid the judgment against him. The 69-year-old Chowdhury has hidden assets and he has left the country.
The film's most gripping moments belong to the survivors who, with their faces often half-lit or blurred for privacy, explain how subtle grooming made them second-guess their experiences. Curry and Cyanide, the Jolly Joseph Case, 2023. This next story will make you second-guess eating at your friend's house. Netflix Curry and Cyanide, the Jolly Joseph Case, invites viewers into the heart of a small Kerala community where the ordinary rhythms of family life dissolved into suspicion and eventually casualty. Jolly Joseph appears to be a devoted, educated woman married into a well-respected family, consistently present at gatherings, cooking for her in-laws, husband, and even the youngest in the household.
इस मामले में मुख्य आरोपी जॉली नेशनल इंस्टीट्यूट ऑफ टेक्नोलॉजी में एक लेक्चरर थी।
जॉली सिर्फ औरत ही नहीं, एक मां भी थी।
Yet beneath the surface of everyday routines, something far more unnerving pulsed through the family's story. One by one, over 14 years, 6 family members, including her husband, both in-laws, and even a 2-year-old, died suddenly, with local suspicions barely stirring until years later. Each time, explanations followed. A heart attack, a stroke, a sudden collapse. Jolly positioned herself as a reliable caregiver, comforting mourners within the family. The documentary exposes how she slowly earned trust. Archival footage shows friends and church members who recall Jolly as gentle and trustworthy.
वो अच्छी तरह जानती थी कि उस पर कोई शक नहीं करेगा।
काफी मुमकिन है कि यही हुआ हो, लेकिन डॉक्टर ने उस पर विश्वास कैसे कर लिया?
कुछ लोग कहते थे कि वो बहुत ही अच्छी थी।
Police and family members, through years of confusion, begin to notice something is deeply off. Why did every tragedy seem to revolve around food prepared by Jolly? Why were deaths spaced out over years, never too close together? The turning point comes when one relative questions an autopsy report, uncovering that the food Jolly served just prior to her husband's death contained cyanide.
Cyanide is very hazardous, everybody knows. When cyanide attacks, even if oxygen is present in the body, cannot be utilized by tissues. That's how the person dies.
The deaths had been ruled natural or attributed to choking or heart attacks. The documentary painstakingly lays out the case built against her by local investigators. Viewers learn that Jolly didn't need elaborate schemes. Instead, poison was discreetly added into the daily menu, often in dishes that had become a daily staple, like curry. The chemical used was nearly undetectable in smell or taste, and when consumed, symptoms mirrored natural ailments. Her calculated restraint is chilling. She waited years between incidents, allowing family grief to settle before she strikes again. Despite her confession, the documentary closes with her ongoing trial and leaves the case unresolved. Level 5. The Ripper, 2020. The Ripper on Netflix locks on to a police investigation that went off the rails from the start. By the time Peter Sutcliffe's name became known, 13 women had died in the north of England. The first thing that stands out in the series is just how many times the authorities missed the person in front of them. A truck driver, Sutcliffe got pulled in for questioning 9 separate times and walked out every single time. He was still under suspicion, but it was dismissed by officers who, according to the documentary, were stuck on stereotypes and unwilling to connect the dots if the facts didn't fit their existing view of the world.
As time went by, we were doing our bit, but the public didn't want to know. So she gets what she deserved. There wasn't any sympathy.
The focus isn't just on the intensity of what Sutcliffe did, but on all the ways systematic misogyny colored every move in the case. From the beginning, police and press drilled down on the idea that the only people at risk were those the system already decided not to protect. There's repeated emphasis by officers that most of the victims were labeled as being in marginalized professions. Some women weren't even placed under the umbrella of Ripper victims at first. If they didn't fit this narrative, their stories got pushed aside. That meant Sutcliffe continued again and again, pretty much with impunity, each delay adding to the number of victims.
Said once is happenstance, twice it's coincidence, but 3 times it's enemy action.
And it wasn't enough. He had to show his disgust as well.
The series calls out this double standard by letting viewers hear directly from those affected. The ignored warnings, the missed connections, the way evidence was discounted because of who the victims were or were assumed to be. Even when a detective pieced together clues about Sutcliffe's car, his behavior, and even matched his shoe size with prints found at the scenes, the information got brushed away or filed under unlikely. And then there's the scene with Tracy Brown, one of the survivors. The documentary has her listening to a recording where Sutcliffe matter-of-factly describes what he did. I hit her with a branch or something, threw her over a wall, and I was thinking of bumping her off. It's a moment that lands with a thud, not because of dramatic music or filmmaking tricks, but his voice. Flat, almost casual. For Brown, sitting there listening, the audience is dropped into the cold bureaucracy that defined the entire investigation.
I said, well, what about me? What about me seeing justice done? I want him to be charged with something that there's no doubt that he did to me.
Not once does Sutcliffe sound like someone recounting a unique human event. For him, it's almost a day-to-day activity. By the time the investigations turned in the right direction, the harm was done. It becomes impossible to untangle what could have been stopped from what was allowed to happen publicly for years. Evil Genius: The True Story of America's Most Diabolical Bank Heist, 2018. A pizza delivery gone wrong? Not quite. The series Evil Genius jumps straight into one of the most shocking crimes ever committed, a bank robbery gone completely off the rails in Erie, Pennsylvania in 2003. It revolves around Brian Wells, a pizza delivery man whose story was so bizarre that law enforcement struggled for years just to sort through what actually happened. Wells arrives at a PNC bank with what looks like a cane, but is actually a homemade gun, while a metal device is fixed to his neck, and shakingly hands over a note demanding cash. The officers close in but can't disengage the bomb on his neck in time, leaving Wells to die on live television in full view of stunned onlookers and police, cementing the event as one of the most twisted crimes in recent memory. The documentary doesn't stop at recounting Wells' ordeal. Instead, it unravels a complex network involving Marjorie Diehl Armstrong, Kenneth Barnes, and William Rothstein. These are not your typical suspects. They're eccentric and highly intelligent, and each brings chaos to the investigation.
Let's go to the pizza bomber case.
Yeah.
Who built the bomb that killed Brian Wells?
I don't know, but I would guess, if I was going to guess, it would have been William Rothstein, because he's been bragging about knowing how to build bombs. That's one reason I broke my engagement off with him.
Diehl Armstrong is unpredictable, manipulative, and known in her social circle for her erratic temperament and ambitious schemes. Barnes, a dealer, floats in and out of the plot with chilling realism, offering up details and playing every side. Rothstein's house, where the bomb was built, turns out to be a trove filled with cryptic notes and clues, leading detectives further down the rabbit hole. The series is relentless in exposing the warped motivations fueling this crime. Money is the initial driver, but as the conspiracy unravels, viewers glimpse psychological manipulation, betrayal, and a gleeful enjoyment of chaos. What remains so uncomfortable is the methodical cruelty threaded through the plan. Wells becomes an expendable pawn forced into a no-win situation with threats and cryptic instructions, left to navigate a scavenger hunt to unlock the bomb, knowing every second ticks down his fate. Or is he really just a victim? A key unresolved question remains. Did Brian Wells willingly participate in the robbery, or was he an innocent pawn coerced into a deadly scheme? Night Stalker: The Hunt for a Serial Killer, 2021. Night Stalker: The Hunt for a Serial Killer from 2021 on Netflix takes a close-up look at the 1980s terror spree of Richard Ramirez, whose crimes gripped Southern California as he crept through homes, picking his targets at random and employing merciless physical violence. Detectives Gil Carrillo and Frank Salerno are at the heart of the documentary, often exhausted, sometimes shaken, but never losing sight of the urgency that shaped their search. Carrillo, at that point relatively fresh on the force, and Salerno, already recognized for catching the Hillside Strangler, understood the stakes but couldn't have expected that this case would force him to re-examine everything he knew. They tag-teamed through stakeouts, clue gathering, and countless restless nights, while their investigation's momentum carries the viewer from one horror scene to the next. No single pattern, weapon, or warning. The Night Stalker blends randomness and cruelty. At any given moment, anyone in the city could be next, and there's no way to feel safe.
But I do remember there was one point where we were driving, and he looked at me and he said, open up the glove compartment. And I did, and there was a gun inside. And he, shut it and just kind of like, just so you know, that's there.
The documentary does not hesitate to reveal detailed crime scene images as investigators talk viewers through what they witnessed. One detail that stands out is the near-fatal attack on Maria Hernandez. She arrived at her Rosemead condo late at night only to come face-to-face with Ramirez. He pointed a gun at her head and fired from mere feet away. Hernandez instinctively put up her hand with her keys, unwittingly redirecting the shot. Playing dead and staying perfectly still, she survived as Ramirez moved on. The series centers her experience, letting its understated horror speak without dramatic turns. It's enough to know she lived simply by taking fate into her own hands. Instead of foregrounding Ramirez, Night Stalker exposes the toll on everyone else, focusing on the sense of unease that followed his attacks and the ongoing trauma for those left behind. The Echoes of Survivors: Inside Korea's Tragedies, 2025. The Echoes of Survivors: Inside Korea's Tragedies doesn't waste time sweeping the darkest corners of South Korea's history, pushing viewers straight into some of the grimmest stories of institutional and personal betrayal. The opening episodes drop you in the middle of the Brothers' Home, an internment camp disguised as a welfare facility. Survivors detail how adults and kids were yanked off the streets and forced into a regime of factory labor and order. Beatings for not meeting quotas were disguised as routine, and the games the staff made survivors play with pain as the prize. From there, the focus shifts to the JMS cult, where stories of psychological manipulation are front and center. Survivors like Maple Yip describe how the leader's charisma persuaded thousands to join, only to find themselves trapped.
정조은이 제일 큰 공범이죠. 정명석이 좋아할 만한 애들 골라서 옆에 둔 거예요. 그리고 이 애들을 계속 관리하고 그게 성추행 아니다, 성폭행 아니다, 혹은 이게 주님의 사랑이다, 뭐 그렇게 다시 교육시키고.
They were controlled by fear, isolation, and a network that reached deep into Korea's institutions, including claims about police officers protecting cult leaders instead of victims. Watching interviews, it's clear that for those inside, escape was nearly impossible. Each account is raw, with details about how their identities were stripped away and how it takes years just to make sense of what happened. The documentary's 6th episode stops you cold. Chijong family survivors take the audience into a concrete basement where normal life is a distant concept. In one interview, a woman describes how captors demanded she suffocate her brother with a plastic bag, and then, knowing compliance was the only way forward, she was handed a firearm and told to shoot another captive. There's a certain tone in her voice that says everything. Compliance meant possible survival, and refusal meant immediate death. The gang didn't bother hiding their aims, believing wealth inequality justified every terrible act. The Samhong department store's collapse plays out with chilling immediacy in both survivors' interviews and archival footage. One student's account stands out, crawling through debris for days, drinking rainwater to stay alive, hearing the groans and silences of those trapped, knowing that there were bodies right beside him in the dark. The sense of abandonment, the shock when help finally arrived, and the haunted relief are present in every word and every image. Level 6. Who Took Johnny? 2014. Who Took Johnny, a 2014 Netflix documentary, tells the story of Johnny Ghosh's sudden vanishing in 1982, pushing a small-town case onto the national stage and forever changing how the world sees cases like this.
And here is a close-up of a 14-year-old boy in terrible trouble. John David Ghosh. He was kidnapped on a Sunday morning as he delivered newspapers in suburban Des Moines.
It doesn't focus only on the disappearance itself, but instead turns a sharp spotlight onto the endless fight by his mother, Noreen Ghosh, whose determination often leaves viewers uneasy. Her drive feels closer to obsession, but with reason. From day one, she's met by silence, stonewalling authorities, and layers of institutional reluctance at every turn. It's a look at how a family's nightmare is compounded by the system's failures. Things turn from heartache to something much darker when Paul Bonacci enters the film. Bonacci says he played a role in Johnny's disappearance, not out of choice, but under the push of much older, more powerful men pulling strings in the shadows. Bonacci's interviews aren't sensational. They're clinical, fragmentary, and believable for reasons that make the stomach drop. He describes Johnny's features in a way that only someone who had actually met him would know. Unique scars, birthmarks, even quirks that never made it to the papers. And these details, not released publicly, force both viewers and investigators to question how deeply this web is woven.
I was just supposed to hold this person down in the back of a car and put this stuff over his face.
And that was Johnny?
Mm-hmm.
Throughout the documentary, viewers watch as Noreen digs through old papers, keeps boxes of evidence, and never allows herself to believe closure is possible. She recalls late-night phone calls, anonymous tips, and menacing letters. The hints always point toward a larger operation targeting young people, with the implication that Johnny wasn't the only victim, but perhaps one of dozens. maybe even hundreds. Each new witness statement seems to open more questions than it answers.
Bonassi described other markings, which were never made public. A scar on Johnny's tongue. Noreen says he bit through his tongue after falling from a treehouse.
Bonacci's account is particularly disturbing because he forces acknowledgement of things most would prefer not to imagine. He's reliving the details, offering times, locations, and inescapable visuals. The film lets the facts speak, leaving viewers with a growing sense that the story's not only unfinished, it may never be resolved. That may be. True answers might stay hidden forever, behind doors most people hope never to open. Capturing the Killer Nurse, 2022. Patients keep on dying under his watch, but nobody realized why. This is the true story of Charles Cullen, a nurse who moved from hospital to hospital in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. For 16 years, no one knew what he was doing under his white nurse outfit. The documentary Capturing the Killer Nurse from 2022 relies on interviews, real medical records, and the testimony of Amy Lauren, a coworker who became instrumental in uncovering Cullen's secret. What's most baffling isn't just what Cullen did, it's how often he nearly slipped away, aided not by brilliance, but by the way the American healthcare system works.
They did mention a professional registered nurse, Charles Cullen, but did not identify acts of foul play or anything of that nature.
Over a dozen hospitals suspected something was wrong. Records label him not recommended for rehire, medication issue, but administrators were happier to see Cullen resign quietly than confront what might come next. Red flags were swept aside, not reported up the ladder or to authorities. The hospital, where more than a dozen deaths occurred, even tried to mislead police, claiming their medicine tracking software had no long-term records. When pressed by law enforcement, hospital representatives advised their staff to refer all questions to lawyers and avoid saying anything.
If protecting human life wasn't a priority for them, it's impossible to guess how low someone could stoop to protect their financial interest and the interest of the hospital.
Cullen consistently exploited night shifts, knowing oversight was weakest then. The medications he used were taken from the hospital's own stockpiles. He could manipulate medication records and revive some patients just enough to keep patterns hard to spot, making each case look like tragic but unremarkable hospital events. The hospitals themselves rarely connected the dots. Instead, when patterns did attract attention, blame shifted, or staffers looked the other way as Cullen left for a new job.
Again, 9 hospitals and a nursing home. And those that caught him or had reason to suspect that something was wrong, they passed him on with positive or neutral references, and he always found another job.
The documentary exposes how risk management approaches, liability concerns, and fears of bad publicity overruled any sense of duty to patients. Some hospitals even blocked police as they investigated. Ultimately, it was only because one nurse broke the code of silence, working with police, wearing a wire, and refusing to look away, that justice was finally served for the 29 victims. Girl in the Picture, 2022. One night during 1990, a woman was found critically injured and dying by a roadside in Oklahoma City. That was the case of Sharon Marshall of Netflix's Girl in the Picture. Authorities soon realize her story is not simple. She leaves behind a confused child, a man claiming to be her husband, and years of unanswered questions. Her identity begins to unravel as investigators dig deeper, discovering the man by her side is actually Franklin Delano Floyd, a fugitive with a dark history who's been posing as Sharon's father and later her spouse.
Franklin Floyd had so many aliases. He was arrested, posted bail. He had been on the run ever since that time and a fugitive for almost 2 decades.
Sharon Marshall's real name wasn't Sharon. She was actually Suzanne Marie Savakis. Her ordeal began as a child in 1975, the year Floyd entered her mother's life. When her mother was jailed for something minor, Floyd vanished with Suzanne and her brother. It would be years before anyone understood what truly happened. Floyd systematically wiped away Suzanne's real identity, raising her under a false name and forging relationships that kept her isolated from everyone who might help her. He later coerced her into marriage and adult work. What follows is a relentless cycle of manipulation. Floyd spent years operating with little scrutiny from authorities, even as he frequently changed his and Suzanne's names, enrolled her in different schools, and moved them across states.
We discovered that in 1989, 1 year before her death, they changed their names. And then they got married under their new names in New Orleans.
The system failed Suzanne at nearly every turn. In the build-up to her death, Sharon, now operating on the name of Tanya Tadlock, was seen primarily as a dancer trying to support a child with little outside suspicion as to why her official documents and background didn't add up. Friends then noticed Tanya was desperate to escape, but Floyd's control was constant, using threats and changing aliases to keep her trapped. When Tanya was killed in what initially seemed a hit and run, it finally forced the authorities to look closer. The resulting investigation revealed a lifetime of horror and unanswered questions.
As a child, she was... I can't imagine anybody being under those conditions for that long a period of time.
Floyd was eventually convicted of kidnapping and sentenced to 52 years, later receiving the death penalty. Level 7. The Devil Next Door, 2019. The Devil Next Door dives headfirst into one of the most chilling accusations to ever reach an Ohio suburb. John Demjanjuk, a Cleveland auto worker, found himself suddenly transformed, at least in the eyes of authorities and survivors, into the suspected former camp guard known as Ivan the Terrible. His extradition to Israel itself made headlines, foreshadowing a legal drama fraught with pain and historical reckoning. The documentary wastes no time showing how this case, built on faded photos and haunting testimony, forces viewers to confront the living scars of Treblinka, the extermination camp. Survivors remember what few can even fathom. They describe lineup after lineup, each step echoing through silent crowds.
And that's where the drama begins.
One account sticks with you. Prisoners were forced into tight, claustrophobic chambers, not knowing if they'd see sunlight again. Guards, faceless in memory but vivid in impact, stood watch as families were separated by barked orders and fierce glances. The language is simple, direct. The faces speak for themselves.
It was a zoo. There were news crews parked halfway down the street.
His wife couldn't believe what was going on.
Documents, especially the Nazi ID cards, are presented as proof that may or may not answer the question about Demjanjuk's true identity. Survivor stories carry most of the weight. They step into the courtroom with memories sharpened by time, eyes watering but voices steady. The documentary features one man who describes being forced to sing while others went gasping for breath, the air growing heavy before silence fell.
He was just blank.
Everybody said the same thing. He's a psychopath holding all of this inside of him.
These narratives resist abstraction. They're detailed, grisly, and persistent. Mass executions are recounted as a matter of course. Piles of belongings, rows of broken shoes, and birds circling overhead after the crowds have vanished. The place was engineered for systematic erasure. Families arrived unaware of what fate had in store. Anything left behind became evidence. A suitcase with initials, a torn coat pocket, a watch stopped at a certain hour. One survivor paused, then details the daily routine: wake-up calls, roll calls, and punishments for stepping out of line. Each moment is punctuated by desperation. The pain is unfiltered. Even as Demjanjuk sits, decades removed from the scene, the past refuses to fade. They believed Demjanjuk was indeed a guard, but not Ivan the Terrible. The conclusion is that he was guilty of war crimes, but misidentified for decades. Conversations with a Killer, the John Wayne Gacy tapes, 2022. Pretending to be a respectable community figure while luring victims to their death. Conversations with a Killer, the John Wayne Gacy tapes sit viewers into chilling reality behind one of America's most notorious figures. It relies heavily on never-before-heard audio recordings between Gacy and his legal defense. Gacy's own voice details his reasoning, deflections, and disturbing detachment from the devastation he created, offering an unfiltered window into his mindset that makes each confession more unnerving. As his words echo through grainy tapes, what emerges isn't just a chronology of violence, but a portrait of someone who rationalizes horror with casual coldness.
Nobody wants to accept what the hell I say, because what I tell you is what I know is fact. I have nothing to gain, I have nothing to lose by telling you something that's not the truth.
Between 1972 and 1978, Gacy left a trail of tragedy that went unnoticed for years. He targeted young men and boys in the Chicago area, exploiting their trust. The tapes reveal how he manipulated situations. His crimes stacked up discreetly, hidden behind the facade of his suburban home long before the full horror was discovered. As investigators pieced together the list of those lost, it all pointed to Gacy's address.
I look for young, clean-cut, barrel looking.
To be gay in the 1970s, there was so much prejudice.
We find out that, yeah, there's a kid, he worked for Gacy. I haven't seen him in a while.
One of the most disturbing moments in the series captures the investigation's breakthrough, the search of Gacy's crawl space. Police discovered unimaginable evidence under his house. First, a few remains, eventually leading to a staggering total of 29 found beneath the uneven dirt floor. The team's grim task went on for days, pulling bones and bodies from the darkness as the true scale of Gacy's atrocities became undeniable. Each layer of earth revealed more victims, methodically hidden and haphazardly left behind. These taped conversations exposed the mechanics of his crimes, from how he fooled his targets to the way he compartmentalized his daily life.
He was also a Democratic precinct captain. He seemed very personable, very friendly.
But he could turn on a dime.
There is a right way, there's a wrong way, and there's my way.
The series refrains from sensationalism, simply letting the facts unfold, which somehow makes everything feel more immediate. Each revelation drives home just how deeply the trauma extended. Experts debated whether his crimes stemmed from abuse, brain injury, or inherent lack of conscience. Many concluded he was incapable of remorse and born without empathy. After extensive study and a brain exam, a forensic psychologist found no abnormalities. They suggested a genetic or biological mutation could explain his predatory nature, but nobody knows for sure what made this man a monster. The Trials of Gabriel Fernandez, 2020. Home should be the place where you feel safe, but what if it's not? The Trials of Gabriel Fernandez bring the true story of 8-year-old Gabriel Fernandez into sharp focus, tracing his final months in Palmdale, California in 2013. The series followed his fate not simply because of the cruelty inflicted inside his home, but because the adults assigned to ensure his safety failed repeatedly. The wounds on Gabriel's body told a grim story, but the interview accounts and official records paint an even more shocking picture. Gabriel was forced to eat cat feces and cat litter.
The evidence will show this case is about one thing, and that's the systematic of a helpless and innocent child. This is Gabriel Fernandez.
Throughout, viewers see how Gabriel's body displayed signs that should have triggered immediate intervention, from broken bones to bruises, some old, some fresh. Social workers and law enforcement officers received several warnings as friends and teachers repeatedly contacted authorities about Gabriel's situation, yet the series shows how these calls get stacked over months, leading to little more than paperwork and empty acknowledgments. An interview with a teacher describes seeing Gabriel arrive at school with injuries, desperately trying to alert officials and not receiving any meaningful support. The documentary doesn't let viewers look away from a system-wide breakdown. Social workers wrote that Gabriel fell outside or was clumsy, despite clear medical reports indicating the injuries were neither random nor accidental. Instead, reports went uninvestigated and visits were rushed. The series points out that 4 social workers and 2 supervisors faced criminal charges for failing to protect Gabriel, pushing the focus far beyond his mother, Pearl Fernandez, and her boyfriend, Isauro Aguirre.
We, the jury, in the above entitled action finding defendant guilty of the crime of in the first degree was committed intentionally and involved the infliction of.
Interviews with law enforcement highlight further issues. In one instance, officers describe being called to the house yet leaving after accepting explanations from Pearl Fernandez. One detective comments on Gabriel's nearly starved condition when he was found, adding another disturbing layer to the case.
The defendant shall be sentenced to a term of life in prison without the possibility of parole. Defendant Isauro Aguirre shall be put to death within the walls of the California State Prison at San Quentin.
The coverage includes courtroom moments and news clips detailing how Gabriel was denied care even when hospital staff raised alarms. The series stitches these interviews and other footage together, mapping out how none of the glaring warning signs seemed to result in action. Ultimately, Gabriel was the one who paid the price. Want more of this kind of video? Then check out this one where we go over the most disturbing K-pop iceberg.